This is Ilumi Zoldyck. This is not Ilumi Zoldyck, because this is a lie. So let's find out why. Hello and welcome to the New World Review, your source for everything anime and manga. My name is Liam, or is it? I mean, I could be lying for all you know. But today we're here to discuss one of the more mind-blowing yet shockingly credible theories in all of Hunter x Hunter. And if you've never heard it before, it's going to sound absurd at first, but this is the idea that Hisoka is Ilumi. Not throughout the entire series, but that this Ilumi, this one in particular, the one that we're following right here and now in the current manga, this guy is Hisoka. And I'm sure that many manga readers would have heard or even had this thought before now because, well, what else have we got to think about right now? But I've always found it to be something of a cute idea for Hisoka to be deceiving the Phantom Troop, just waiting for his chance at a rematch with Crollo aboard the Black Whale 1. And there's always been some pretty decent evidence to back it up as well. A lot of which has come to me via Twitter from a user named Yuki, and I'll have a link to her channel in the description because in addition to thinking about Hunter x Hunter, she also makes very cool musics. However, these few extra pieces of evidence brought to my attention have completely changed my thinking of what I once thought was nothing more than a cute idea. But I am now close to 100% convinced that this is not Ilumi Zoldyck. And by the end of this video, I think that you'll be in the same position. And right now, you are also in the position to subscribe to the New World Review, which will result in consistent injections of Hunter-based culture administered directly into your YouTube feed. Highly beneficial to any Hunter, so press the red button, join our association, and do say hi in the comments below if you're new to the channel. Welcome. But let's get into some much needed context. For those of you who have not read the manga events beyond the anime, or for those of you who have just kind of forgotten what's going on during the longest hiatus the series has ever endured, here is the swift TLDR. While everyone else was preparing for the Dark Continent voyage, Hisoka fought against Crollo in Heaven's Arena. The fight was amazing. It's one of the best combat sequences I've ever read in manga, but it resulted in Crollo's victory, and he managed to quite literally kill Hisoka. However, just prior to his death, Hisoka made a heartfelt plea to Bungee Gum and programmed it to revive him after death, which it did, and due to the concept of post-mortem Nen, Hisoka's Nen abilities received a significant power boost afterwards, which is important because it forms the technical backbone of this theory, just as Hisoka's abilities form the literal bungee bone of his new body parts. In any case, a newly revived Hisoka then went on to kill both Shalnok and Kortopi, which incurred the anger of Crollo and the rest of the Crollo troop, so currently they are all hunting for Hisoka aboard the Black Whale 1 and causing chaos alongside all of the Succession War business. Oh, and Ilumi is also there. Ilumi has joined the Phantom Troop, the reason given being that Hisoka apparently paid Ilumi to put a hit on himself, which, knowing Hisoka and Ilumi, look, it's not at all out of the question. They are the kind of people who would absolutely enter into that sort of arrangement. But the general thought of this video is that this is not Ilumi. This is Hisoka imitating Ilumi's body with his newfound post-mortem Nen abilities. When he was resurrected, Hisoka demonstrated the power to create false body parts using Bungee Gum and make them look entirely realistic with an amped up version of Texture Surprise. The combination of which could theoretically allow Hisoka to mold his body into the shape of Ilumi, with Texture Surprise plonked on top to complete the aesthetic illusion. Which wouldn't be particularly difficult because Hisoka and Ilumi have a similar physique as it is. In fact, they're both almost the exact same height as well. Hisoka is 187 centimeters tall, whereas Ilumi is 185, according to the Hunter x Hunter guidebook. Although in the actual series, Crollo does state that Hisoka is over 6'2", which would be over 190 centimeters in reasonable measurement units, but it doesn't really matter. Or does it? No, it doesn't. What matters a bit more is what we haven't seen, and something that we have not seen is Hisoka. Despite the Phantom Troop's confidence that he is aboard the Black Whale 1, neither we nor they have actually seen him during the Succession War arc. And whenever Hisoka's not on screen, everyone should be asking the question, where's Hisoka? Which has led the fanbase to the bizarre, outlandish conclusion that Hisoka is being a rather tricksy hobbitsis and pretending to be Ilumi. And I say outlandish because that is what I used to think. Not anymore though, because whilst this may look and sound like Ilumi at a casual glance, there is a mountain of minor inconsistencies that point to a very different conclusion. And the first thing I would like to point to is knee pads. I'd never really thought that knee pads would be the key to anything in particular, but Succession War Ilumi does undeniably come equipped with them. A seemingly innocuous design feature at first glance, because this is Ilumi after all. He is weird and therefore he wears weird things. The interesting thing, however, is that knee pads Pads? Pads, knee pads, come on. The interesting thing, however, is that knee pads are actually something of a Hisoka trademark. He's worn them on at least 2 separate occasions, both of which were his appearances in Heaven's Arena. He wore them in the series during the Heaven's Arena arc where he famously fought against Gon, but he also whipped them out again to fight Chrollo in the same venue. Meanwhile, Illumi has never once worn knee pads in his entire Hunter x Hunter tenure, and yet now here he is, clearly garbed in Hisoka's trademark knee wear. And yeah, I get it, this is a very small thing, and if this was the only piece of evidence, then we just laugh this theory right out of the association, but it is one small, wildly curious choice made by Togashi alongside many others. The next of which is Illumi's speech. Now this is not at all apparent to us in English, but in Japanese, Illumi's speech patterns are quite inconsistent with his character prior to the Succession War, with one of the biggest of inconsistencies being pronouns. Now this is something that once again is not visible in the English translation because we have a completely different system to Japanese, but Hisoka and Illumi actually have very different ways of referring to themselves. For example, in English, you would just say I. You know, I did this, or I did that, or I never get out of the house because I spend all of my time talking about fictional hunters in a very dimly lit room. Whereas in Japanese, the very act of saying I differs wildly based on a wide array of varying factors such as gender, informality, social status, whatever. But the most basic way of saying I that people are probably aware of is watashi. It's a very long way of saying I, so long that more often than not it just gets dropped from sentences entirely and just implied, but this is by far the most neutral and polite. In Hisoka's case, he is neither neutral nor polite and has a well-recorded history of using the pronoun boku, which, to put it simply, is a less formal incarnation which is generally used by young boys but not exclusively. But it is often seen as a word that, say, a 12-year-old boy would fearlessly wield, which makes a lot of sense with Hisoka because his character is quite often playful and twistedly childlike in nature. Illumi, on the other hand, is significantly more blunt and uses the pronoun ore, and ore is very much the calling card of a confident older male. It is completely informal, it's considered to be quite rude in many situations, and it's actually perfect for Illumi because he has no filter. In addition to expressing little to no emotion, Illumi's words tend to get straight to the point. There is no messing around with him, which all becomes fascinating, very fascinating, because Succession War Illumi abandons his previous use of language and instead uses boku whenever he refers to himself instead of ore. Now this might seem really minor to us filthy English-speaking swine, but these two pronouns carry very different connotations in Japanese, and so this is unlikely to be a situation where Togashi just kind of forgot what he set up. Although to be fair, that does also happen, but the bokus, the ores, the watashis and atashis, so on and so forth, actually form very core parts of Japanese characters. It helps us understand who they are. And the fact right now is that the way Illumi is talking is much more in line with Hisoka's character than it is with his. And pronouns aren't everything. In fact, Illumi's general use of language is also just very unlike him. Remember when I said before that Illumi is incredibly blunt and to the point? Well, those things that I just said is what he is not doing right now. Previously, Illumi didn't waste time with fanciful metaphors or double meanings, which is why his words to the Phantom Troop now are so fascinating. When speaking about his arrangement with Hisoka, Illumi refers to his assassin fee as a prenuptial agreement, or a prenup for short, which is already quite out of character, but what we really miss in English is that this line comes with accompanying furigana in Japanese. Furigana being a set of basic Japanese hiragana or katakana designed to let you know how to read certain kanji, and this is necessary for many reasons, including the fact that the same kanji can be read in several different ways depending on the context in Japanese. But with furigana you can also construct all sorts of clever language stuff, and in this case the furigana reads as engagement ring. Like it literally says ingejimento ringu, which is a very curious choice for Illumi at best and completely out of character at worst. Whereas you could certainly picture Hisoka equating an assassination fee to a sort of engagement ring because that's just what Hisoka is. And we're not done because in addition to that, and this is something that is completely lost in English, but when speaking about the Phantom Troop, Illumi uses the word konkai, which translates to this time. So what he literally says is, this time I have joined the spiders at Hisoka's request. This time implying that there was maybe a previous time. And of course, Hisoka was once a member of the Phantom Troop, so that would make sense if he was sneakily referring to himself. Although I should point out that the Phantom Troop have actually hired Illumi before. They paid him to assassinate the 10 Dons during York New City, so this could also be referring to that incident. As much as we've not seen them in the same location before now, Illumi and Chrollo do have an established working relationship, sort of. So take the whole konkai thing as you will. Admittedly, it's not the strongest piece of language-based evidence, but it is interesting to point out, if only because it was omitted from the English translation. To get out of the world of language for a second though, one of the more sinister pieces of visual evidence comes comes from the cover of volume 36. Here we have the full current cast of the Phantom Troop, Illumi included, but scattered amongst them we also have 3 flowers, which assumedly denotes the dead members, 2 of which we can assign to Shalnok and Cortopi, although the third is a very interesting discussion. Either way, smack bang in the middle of this gathering, we have Illumi equipped with knee pads and holding a flower, implying that Illumi has some sort of connection to the other flowers on the cover, which if we wanted to paint in the Hisoka theory colors, we would be implying that he was responsible for their deaths. And I honestly don't see any other reason why Togashi would showcase Illumi in this way. According to the information we have, Illumi's involvement in the Succession War was purely intended to be bonus material, a plaything for Hisoka to toy around with while he kills the rest of the troop. And yet on this cover, Illumi is so profoundly important, given the central spot directly connected to the flowers, and it can definitely be interpreted as Hisoka hiding in plain sight from the troop. And that's not all, because apart from Feitan and Benolanov, who have facial coverings, Illumi, for whatever reason, is the only character on this cover who is missing a mouth. And it was suggested by a Reddit user named Scene_K that this relates to an old Japanese saying which translates to "a dead person has no mouth." A similar saying in English might be "dead men tell no tales," which could also be a potential reference to Hisoka because, well, he did the death thing. And you might think that we're overvaluing the significance of Illumi's missing mouth here, and I would agree, were it not for the fact that Togashi himself makes it extraordinarily significant at the beginning of the book. Volume 36 starts with an author's note. The most simplistic author's note I've ever seen, actually, which is a drawing of a mouth and the words "spoilers," I dare say. So we found Illumi's missing mouth, I suppose. And 'tis evidently soft and supple lips, a saying that looking too deeply into this may very well be a spoiler. Everything about this cover is meticulously crafted by Togashi, which he does have a recorded history of doing. For example, the cover of volume 30 featured all of the Zodiacs and only 2 of them with their hands behind their backs, those being Pariston and Sayu, who ended up being the 2 to betray the organization. It's subtle, so subtle that it almost makes you think that you are the crazy one until Togashi comes clean and eventually does reveal the answer. In this case, the cover and the author's note are more brazen than any that have come before it. But one question I do have is regarding the 3 flowers. For the Illumi as Hisoka idea to work, this would imply that Hisoka is connected to 3 deaths, but deciphering the third is not necessarily that straightforward. Kurapika was the clear cause of death for Uvagin, and I would say the same for Pakunoda, but in the past, Hisoka did defeat another troop member who held the number 4 spot, and while it was never explicitly stated that he killed that member, I don't really see many other outcomes in which that battle would have concluded. So that could be our 3 dead troop members, Shalnok, Cortopi, and the former number 4, all slain by the bungulicious hand of Hisoka. The other way you could interpret this cover is a reference not to the past, but to the future. This could be telling us who Hisoka is going to kill, which would make sense with the lips of the volume warning us about potential spoilers. And if you were to go by who the flowers were closest to, that would be Finks, Kaluto, and either Shizuku or Franklin. That's the simplest way to look at it anyway. I suppose you could also analyze the flowers by color or however you like, but that's the general idea, that they are there and they mean things. Either way, the flowers represent dead troop members or they foreshadow future deaths of troop members. And whatever the case may be, they are connected to Illumi, a man who has absolutely no reason to be involved in such connections. But if this is Hisoka, then firstly, this is sinister AF, and secondly, it makes all the sense in the world. But I'd also like to bring up a scene in the manga of Illumi's conversation with Mizaiston. After the troop decide to split up, Illumi and Kaluto get rather hilariously caught almost immediately, after which point Illumi requests a cell with a shower. Now this is, I will admit, some glorious overthinking, I warn you, but Illumi has never been the type of person to be overly conscious of his own cleanliness. I mean, the dude even slept in a hole that one time. On the other hand, frequent bathing is practically another Hisoka motif, such as when we dwell on him showering at Heaven's Arena, but we do also intrude on him bathing at Greed Island. He may be a sick, twisted, degenerate, thirsty battle clown, but at least he's a clean clown. I'll grant that this is probably one of the most outlandish connections of the video, but at the same time, Illumi's words, once again, they're just very out of character. Illumi is not the kind of person who wastes words requesting a room with a shower that he doesn't need. And during this conversation, Illumi also gives up the information that the entirety of the Phantom Troop are aboard the ship, which is information that he volunteers. Volunteers being a very key word because Illumi does not volunteer, especially if it's relevant to his current job. I really cannot emphasize enough just how flippant flippant and reckless Illumi is being on these pages, and how it is very unlike the Illumi that we know. Now let's get into some of the issues with this theory, because Kaluto has been brought up a couple of times and he does present a potential problem. Hisoka might be able to fool the troop into thinking that he's Illumi, but Kaluto, as a brother of Illumi, should probably know better. I mean, yeah, they're quite a few years apart, they probably don't spend a ton of time together, but in theory, Kaluto should probably be able to recognize if Illumi is acting slightly not Illumi. So to account for that, we may need to get a little bit more convoluted. We either need to suggest that Kaluto has no idea whatsoever and it's just kind of meh writing, or that Kaluto has no strong connection to Illumi despite their brotherliness, or that Kaluto does know and he is in on the clever ruse. It's not too far out of the realm of possibility because Kaluto has no real loyalty to the troop. He's only there for the very vague mission of getting his brother back. The meaning of which is a gigantic question in and of itself, and in fact I have a whole video discussing that issue which I do recommend checking out. But all Hisoka really needs to do is promise to assist Kaluto just as he has done in the past, notably with say Kurapika during York New City, but this does require that extra layer of thought. And if this were any other series, I wouldn't even bother to go that far. But Togashi does engage in these kind of complex cerebral scenarios, so for better or worse, nothing is ever off the table in Hunter x Hunter. And even with it on the table, the evidence is reaching a critical mass. Togashi has dripped in enough subtle hints to paint a beautifully foreshadowed picture without completely giving away the game. Illumi speaks like Hisoka. His design incorporates one of Hisoka's trademarks. Hisoka does have the technical ability to make this a reality, and Togashi is heavily suggesting that there is something very off about Illumi in regards to the author's notes and cover of volume 36. At this point, I would be much more surprised if this actually was Illumi. Although that's not off the table either. There could exist a situation where two things are true, and Illumi is working with Hisoka whilst Hisoka is impersonating Illumi, and they're both just running around and doing stupid clown things. There's definitely a lot of different ways this could go, but the one piece of certainty we have is that this Illumi is not what he seems. And I am convinced that this is actually Hisoka in disguise. But if you'd like to examine another fun Hunter x Hunter theory, then I have another video that details the history and logic behind the Feitan is actually a Zoldyck theory. I know it sounds pretty absurd, but hey, so did this video, and there's a good deal of substance to it, so I look forward to seeing you there.